Well, here we go again. Victoria and Victorians have gone into lockdown. The whole state. The news arrived yesterday via a government press conference, and it was announced by the Premier, Daniel Andrews. All morning, Victorians had been hearing that something was imminent. A lockdown, perhaps. The message even warned of impending doom if something wasn't done. When Daniel Andrews reached the microphone, he suddenly presented Victorians with a much more dire picture than the one he had delivered before the last lockdown. He actually spoke of the potential for a seismic disaster, and he added the virus had mutated, hence the need to introduce a snap 5-day stage 4 lockdown. It was to be a circuit breaker, in Andrews' words, a short, sharp blast to give Victoria what it needed to get ahead of this new, faster moving strain of the coronavirus. COVID, according to Daniel Andrews, had now become smarter, faster, and infinitely more infectious. How had the virus become faster and smarter, Mr. Premier? When only 3 days earlier, the Premier had stood before the very same cameras and spoke glowingly of Victoria's gold standard hotel quarantine system and how well it was doing. He had added that the entire country was envious of Victoria's health response. And when challenged by one inquiring journalist to validate his claim, he became defensive. Now, here we are, 24 hours on, and Victorians again find themselves locked down because of the government's incompetence and continuing mismanagement of the quarantine system. Pretty difficult for the Premier to announce Victoria's gold standard protocols had failed when only days before they were supposed to be the envy of the country. But instead of falling flat on his face, the Premier actually upped the stakes and spoke of a more virulent virus, one that had just arrived from the United Kingdom. Suddenly, his much vaunted rolled gold hotel quarantine system had collapsed under the weight of just 19 cases, all linked to the Holiday Inn at Tullamarine Airport. It was one of the designated quarantine sites throughout the city for overseas travellers and returning Australians. So how does the most envied quarantine system in the country consistently get it so wrong? Why has the Premier refused the assistance of the military? And what is this aversion he has to having the ADF provide assistance? Today, every Victorian is in lockdown. And there's every reason to believe that the 5-day snap lockdown will be extended beyond Wednesday, the 17th of February. Simply put, the Premier and his expert medical advisors can't be trusted to get it right. Now, we need to understand this. The onus is on Daniel Andrews to not only say his people can do the job, but he needs to be able to prove that Victoria's system can handle the mess it continues to find itself in. New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian is the actual benchmark when it comes to having to live with COVID. She's managed the cluster outbreaks, and not only that, she's done that while not shutting down an entire state, nor locking the borders. She's actually successfully kept the state operational, even thriving during the pandemic. Yet Daniel Andrews isn't Gladys, nor does he care to follow her lead. Instead, he prefers to invoke an agenda of fear and scaremongering in order to control Victorians. He much prefers to prosecute his case by speaking to the people, taking his time, creating a narrative of impending doom with the Grim Reaper coming to take Victorians. Now, strong leaders in a crisis invoke calm and reason. But Victoria's Premier has deliberately painted a different picture. He offered this yesterday when questioned. And these are the quotes. It shows just how incredibly infectious this virus is. Our public health system has told us it's only spreading faster. This hyper-infectious variant is moving at hyper speed. That's the quote. Well, it appears that Daniel Andrews actually revels in manipulating and embellishing any narrative as long as it serves his agenda. And what's really concerning is just how many Victorians are buying in and accepting the Premier's story. Now, are they naive, or are they being led by a chorus, which includes an inexperienced media pack that isn't taking the Premier to task over the government's many missteps? They might even be doing his bidding with headlines like this. This yesterday, 5,000 people could be affected by Melbourne Airport exposure site, say the health authorities. Now, is it possible that some Victorians have lost the art of critical thinking, failing to acknowledge the Premier's desperation as he fights to keep a tight grip on power? Daniel Andrews is a renowned media performer who has politically weaponised COVID. In fact, he's done it far better than his counterparts in SA, in WA and in Queensland. But if he was serious about containing and managing COVID, then he would be encouraging the chief medical officers around the country to introduce rapid antigen and antibody testing. Now, by his own admission, Daniel Andrews said yesterday, and this is his quote, "Right now, we're reaching close contacts well within the 48-hour benchmark, but the time between exposure, incubation, symptoms, and testing positive is rapidly shortening. So much so that even secondary close contacts are potentially infectious within that 48-hour window." But even with that 48-hour window, Mr. Premier, using only PCR testing, which costs Australians $180 a test, it means infection rates and community transmission can explode. By introducing rapid antigen and rapid antibody testing, it would allow the state governments to not only get a much better grip of the infection and community transmission, but do it all within a quarter of an hour. 15 minutes. Within those 15 minutes, government authorities would know who's been affected and who's safe and healthy. And add to that, the country would also save $155 a test. The pathology groups are enjoying this time. It's been a gold mine. The Premier has steadfastly refused to entertain the idea or even discuss it with the companies that have developed the rapid testing kits. Why is that? It's a legitimate question that needs an answer. Introducing the rapid testing would save time and money. I think the Premier's leadership has been disastrous. His credibility has been shredded and his position as state leader further eroded. His message to every single Victorian today: I know today will be hard, likely tomorrow will be even harder, but remember, no one else in the world anywhere has achieved what we have. And just as we had the courage and conviction to win this war before, we can do it again. Those comments are disingenuous and duplicitous. Daniel Andrews has let down every Victorian, and Victoria's media, instead of keeping him honest, has just joined the chorus.